Cool. All right. Well, welcome. I'm here with Jasmine Burton, who goes by Jazz. She's a social impact designer and hybrid professional. She's founded several companies in the global health space, which she'll walk us through and tell us about. Welcome, Jazz.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me. Really excited to be here.
Yeah. Well, give us a little bit of a background of just the kind of general space and sector you work in and how you started working in that sector.
Yeah, I come from a product design background. I studied at Georgia Tech, and I was just starting my design career at Georgia Tech, and I was really sort of disillusioned by this idea of using design as a tool, as a practice, as a career to add more, unnecessary kind of things into our world. So I was really sort of looking for a way, kind of from the beginning of my design career, to use design as a tool for impact. I didn't know what it was called. I didn't really know what I was looking for, but that was something that, as we were learning about materials and kind of product life cycles of the things that you create, that was just something that was top of mind for me. I went to the Georgia Tech Women's Leadership Conference when I was a freshman, and that's where I heard about the global sanitation crisis and how, half the world doesn't have access to safely managed sanitation, and how that reality disproportionately impacts the livelihoods, career advancements of women and girls around the world. And, again, as being someone who just started college, I was like, how is it possible that girls are still dropping out of school because their schools don't have toilets, right? Like, we're in this world of all this technological advancement, but toilets and menstrual health products are keeping girls behind. And as a designer, it's like there's so much to unpack there, from a systems level, from a product level, from an access level. Again, I was a freshman, I was 18. Coming out of this conference, I called my parents and I was like, I'm going to design toilets. This is what I'm going to do. Which, if you can imagine, they were like, what? let's talk about what that looks like. So that was sort of my entry point into this world. And yeah, that from there, it's been a journey of discovery and realizing that, again, if you're creating in the impact economy, you have to think about all these intersectionalities of people, of sectors, of skill sets, so that you're creating a solution that can actually exist in the real world. So that's been my journey over the past 6 years, and I'm happy to chat further about that over the course of this conversation.
Yeah. Tell us more a little bit about the hygiene space overall and kind of what the main issues are, and maybe even touch on some of what you just mentioned about the intersectionalities that crop up.
Yeah. Like I mentioned, there's 7 billion people in the world today, and everybody goes to the bathroom, everybody poops. This is a reality that we know is 100% true.
Yeah.
But the fact that people, both in the US and abroad, still don't have access to safely managed sanitation, meaning they don't have a toilet, meaning they don't have waste management services that actually effectively get waste away from people in a way that they can live to their fullest potential, right? Like, that reality still is keeping so many people behind. And I think COVID has underscored that to a level that we haven't seen before. You see a lot of public bathrooms in the US are closing because of, you want to control the disease spread, but then all these communities that don't have access to, communities experiencing homelessness, or, rural communities that live on septic lines, and maybe they have old septic systems, and the lack of, sanitation maintenance really leads to disproportionate health outcomes. So you see, folks that, in the US, you see folks not having access to sanitation. So you see open defecation in cities like San Francisco, Atlanta. You see that globally too, where people in different cultures, maybe, there isn't public sanitation available, but maybe it's also, a norm. So kind of, how do you create solutions that actually meet people where they are, rather than sort of helicoptering in and saying, hey, like, you shouldn't be going to the bathroom in the bushes, like, you should be using this, ceramic throne that we have, right? Like, you want to make sure that you're, creating solutions that make sense in terms of the full supply chain, in terms of the full user experience. So it really is something that's resonant both domestically and abroad. And I think, again, like, when you look at systems like septic systems in the US, I have a lot of friends in the Atlanta area that are buying homes. And if you don't ask, you could buy a house that's on a septic tank that's not connected to the Atlanta sewer line. It could be 30 years old. That's if it's almost, to its capacity, that's like a $30,000 cost that you weren't prepared to spend. So that model is really, again, not sustainable for people. But then also, if it collapses, that leads to things like hookworm outbreaks. So it's like, there's a lot of opportunity, again, both in the US and abroad, to think about how we cater to these human functions like sanitation, like menstrual health, where it's taboo. It's hard to talk about. There's a lot of gender and social inclusion stigmas. But I do think, again, like as we're sort of emerging from this time where, you know, a lot of organizations and people are reevaluating their kind of equity and inclusion practices, this is something that I think hopefully will come out of it, is sort of seeing people, you know, realize that we're all connected. And if we don't address people across, you know, the whole entire globe and in all walks of life, it's going to impact all of us. So yeah,
Yeah.
that's a high level overview.
Yeah,
But yes,
no, I'm sure there's so much more to get into. I know you work both domestically and internationally. What are some of kind of the systemic differences that you see? You highlighted some of the US ones. Are there differences in what you see abroad versus here domestically?
yeah, and I think you know, the first time I worked abroad, I had the chance 3 years after I told my parents I was designing toilets. I had the opportunity to work on a senior design project at Georgia Tech with a team of incredible women, and we came up with this toilet concept based off of research. We like interviewed a bunch of people, and you know, again, when you're in university and you're in school, like that's awesome. But then you have this reality check when you put something that you've created, that you've designed, in front of real people to get real solutions or real feedback, right? So it's not just this conceptual, you know, it should work or it should, you know, make everyone happy. It should be the answer, but it's this really sort of it's a humbling experience, I think, that a lot of designers have to go through, or a lot of creators in general, where it's like, if it doesn't meet the needs of the people that you're working with, then it's not a good design, right?
Mhm.
And I think, again, for us, like coming out of university, we were like, great, we won a competition, we got some funding, we went to a refugee camp in Kenya a couple months later, and you know, immediately we were like, wow, there's a lot of things we didn't know. You know, some of the concepts that we were like, this will be awesome, they just didn't work conceptually. People didn't understand how our drawer system that separated out different consistencies of waste, didn't know how that worked. And then things like, how do you even talk to people about sanitation or about these stigmatized topics? Like, how do you actually get that feedback? And as a designer, as someone who's like, this is something I've been working on, I'm so passionate about it, I really want to like work with people, you have to recognize your limitations too, right? And I think
Mhm.
that's another experience of humility that I myself have been actively growing in, and I know a lot of others in this space, recognizing that in the US, like I'm a Black American woman, but in some contexts, I am not received that way. And because of my American, you know, my Americanness, like that will bias the data. And so recognizing at some points that you do need to step back, and at what point do you need to hand off the baton so that other folks, other designers, engineers from in culture, like the culture that you're working in, can, you know, get the real data, get the real
Mhm.
feedback that you wouldn't be able to get because of how you present in that context. And
Yeah.
again, I think that that's like a really big piece of something I've seen both domestically and globally, but something that I think all people should recognize, that it's not
Yeah.
like you're a bad person. It's like at some point you have your own limitations, and you have to
Right.
recognize them.
Yeah, I'd love to circle back to that, as I'll put a pin in it, about just kind of our design, our role as, you know, product people or designers or whoever, going into a certain context and understanding our power, our privilege that we're bringing into it. Before we go back to that, I'd love to just know more about your organizations and kind of the projects you've started to tackle the issues that you've mentioned.
Yes, yeah. So after I had the chance to work with some incredible folks in the Kakuma refugee camp in Kenya, coming out of school, I founded an organization called Wish for Wash. And so Wash being water, sanitation, and hygiene. And we operate as a collective. So we have a nonprofit arm and a for-profit arm. Our for-profit arm is really kind of, it houses a lot of our product development, which if you've ever worked in physical manufacturing, there's a lot of layers to kind of the processes and the timelines. And again, with COVID, a lot of things have really shifted and stalled, and we're sort of figuring out next steps. So the for-profit holds a lot of that R&D, as well as the intellectual property that we have around some of our initial toilet concepts.
Okay.
And then our nonprofit is really working on sort of creating this next generation of thought leaders that work at these intersections that I mentioned, right? This idea of kind of bringing in high schoolers, you know, university students, grad students, you know, young professionals, even all together in a space to say, everybody's voices are needed in this conversation. We need to have engineers, we need to have designers, we need to have business people, public health people, like across all these disciplines. But we also need to recognize that, you know, you might be a freshman in college, but you have this mindset and this worldview that could be beneficial in this work. So sort of giving people in our organization the autonomy to own their successes and own kind of failing forward, as we call it. So we're an organization that's rooted in human-centered design. So this idea that, failure is a part of the process, and we need to talk about those failures, and we need to publish those failures, and we need to share those failures so that the sector at large can learn and grow and iterate and improve and move the needle forward, rather than sort of spinning our wheels, reinventing the wheel, which I think sometimes, particularly development work, does, unfortunately. And so, yeah, that's really what we do in the nonprofit arm. We have about 60 plus people across the US right now, working on a number of things, from peer-reviewed publications, kind of looking at the intersection of innovation and inclusion in the sanitation space, to creating curricula, working with Girl Scouts. How do we create space for young girls to see the opportunity for STEM as a tool for driving change, right? A lot of people are like, oh my gosh, there's so many big problems. It's so hard to even think about how I could, step foot in it. And it's like, if you have that mindset of design thinking, iteration, empathy, like that could be something that could be mapped across, all global grand challenges. And so it's been really cool to sort of see our organization grow over the past 6 years. And so that's my kind of entry point into the social enterprise space. And since then, I've also created a women-owned consulting firm called the Hybrid Hype. And basically, for a number of reasons, I found myself picking up contracts so that I myself can grow in my professional development, but also so that I could help bootstrap some of Wish for Wash's work. So giving us that flexibility to stay true to a lot of our mission as we were sort of figuring it out, rather than having to pivot based on funding needs. It really sort of gave us that flexibility from the beginning. And through the Hybrid Hype, I've been able to do contracts with Planned Parenthood, with the CDC, with IDEO. So really, again, cross-cutting from health to gender equity to design. And then last year, coming out of initial conversations and the start of COVID, there was a big movement in the period space where people were saying periods don't stop for pandemics. You saw toilet paper being an essential good and a lot of these other hygiene products, but you didn't see that same momentum and kind of focus around period products when, half the world has a period, and like, why do we not have access to these products and services? And a lot of those supply chains were disrupted in COVID. And sort of coming out of that, I co-founded an initiative with two other women designers, actually in the Bay Area. So we, have been mostly remote as we've started this initiative, but this idea of sort of creating conversations around the future of periods. And some of these concepts, we work with illustrators that kind of provocate what the future of periods could look like. So some of them are really uncomfortable, some of them are weird, but this idea of like, not one period is the same, just because that's sort of how it's been showcased in the product world, right? Like we have pads, tampons, and cups, but it's like we have so many, cars on the market. Why do we not have, more period products on the market? Yeah. So anyways, it's this idea of sort of disrupting the status quo in terms of how we frame periods.
Yeah, I love that. Yeah, we have an internal kind of women's group at our company, and we were talking about period products in there, and just how like you assume, that it's kind of just what it is what you have access to. But you don't assume that, oh yeah, that could be expanded and like researched on more than it has been so far. So what you're saying is like, you have a lot of time, you're not busy at all. You're totally free. I get it.
Yeah, no, it's definitely like, a hustle, but it's like really cool to like, work with people and, have something that you're so passionate about. And I think too, again, seeing the momentum around some of these issues in COVID has been really, obviously it's been a dark, really challenging time for the world, but I think that's been a bright spot to see like, okay, people are opening their eyes to this. Like there's an opportunity to actually like see, like follow through with that momentum in the years to come. So I'm really hopeful for that.
I'm curious as to how, with your consulting firm and Wish for Wash and even the Period Initiative, like how are they all kind of informing each other? Have you found things that kind of cross-pollinate across them?
Definitely. I think, so yeah, Wish for Wash is all, again, rooted again in innovation and inclusion in the water sanitation and hygiene space, which is a part of global health. And a lot of the work that I've done as an independent consultant has been related to global health and design. So I feel like kind of all of these initiatives that I've been a part of creating really sort of have this equity and inclusion lens, but also this design thinking lens, and also this kind of global health lens. So I think in terms of the nature of how each of the organizations work, they are very similar in terms of like the outputs and sort of what those things are. That's sort of where they differentiate, I would say. But yeah, like how they're rooted, I think are very similar.
Well, yeah, let's get back to this kind of question of, equitable design and different approaches. I think the design world, as every other world right now, is also having this reckoning about how do we do stuff more equitably and recognize the dynamics between designers and the community, and kind of disrupt that in a way and think about how is the community leading or at the forefront. And I know for us and a lot of my peers talk about so many different methods out there, whether it's, meeting people where they are, and being able to kind of do research through like WhatsApp or different methods that really like don't burden people's time.
Right.
And there's now this research has come out of it's a firm in Chicago that I'm blanking on, but the research was titled "Why Am I Always Being Researched?"
Yes.
And kind of that concept of like, yeah, we do burden a lot of people with like, hey, can I have your time to like understand this and that? So I'd love to learn, yeah, just kind of the ways you guys have evolved the research process or the design process, or new things you've tried in context that are like kind of different from the things that have been put out by IDEO and others initially.
Yeah, I mean, I think yes, all of what you said resonates with me. I mean, I think yeah, when we talk about communities that are disproportionately represented or impacted by things, I feel like that time piece isn't always highlighted or recognized as a cost for people, particularly if you're in a resource constrained community or marginalized community. Like that is a huge piece, and I think too, sort of the ideas around traditional research methods, I mentioned before, like recognizing kind of your own how you're received
Right.
in a community,
Right.
regardless of your intention or all these
Right.
things, I think are so important. But then I think beyond that, sort of to your point about methods, like this idea of how do you kind of break down some of these barriers to talk about things so that people feel comfortable sort of revealing their true preference or revealing sort of their real thoughts. And
Mm.
one of my thesis advisors, so I got my master's in public health at the London
Mm.
School of Hygiene, and
Mhm.
one of my thesis professors, he founded this kind of toolkit called behavior centered design, which is similar to design thinking. It is all rooted in behavior, and particularly when you're looking at things like sanitation and hygiene, where like largely a lot of communities that are being studied they're studied a lot. And so people sort of know the words. People will be like, oh yes, I always wash my hands after I change my baby's diaper, because it's like, you're supposed to say
What to
the
say?
things that
Yeah.
people want you to
Yeah.
say, right? And it's
Especially when like an outsider's coming in and asking all those questions. Yeah.
right. Yes. And then there's also the like layered things where it's like, are people going to think I'm a, worse mother if I don't say that
Right.
I've done these things? And so
Right.
it is sort of about revealing that, like, how are these tools that we can use so that we can help reveal reality? And I think this toolkit, this behavior centered design toolkit, was really a piece that I integrated in my thesis. And I think it's fun in the sense that it makes people, kind of the people that you're working with in the community, feel like they can either be someone else, like you can step into a new
Mm.
character, or you can have them sort of document things without having to say them, because sometimes it's like
Mm.
expressing it verbally is the challenge. So whether that's drawing or whether that's like photo documentation of sort of something that you might not be comfortable talking about, or it gives people the opportunity to say, if I had like $1 million, like a Monopoly sort of game, like this is what I would do, sort of to show value and sort of preference in a
Mm.
context that isn't right now. And I think
Right.
there's so much power in tools like that, because it again sort of shows the humanity of people who are, living their best, they're doing the best to like live
Right.
their best lives, and again sort of giving them the opportunity to show their truth in a way that doesn't put them in a situation where they feel like they're going to be judged or
Right. There's
further
a
questioned or
consequence or
anything.
something. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
And you kind of mentioned this idea of like, yeah, as a designer, I have my limitations if I'm going in, as an American into another context, even if in America I'm, seen as my gendered or racial, whatever construct here. When you hit kind of that limit, is there something else you do to bring it? Like, do other community members step in, or are there other processes that work in that
Yeah,
scenario?
yeah. I mean, I think so for us, we've worked in a lot of settings where there's different kind of structures, power structures at play. So whether that's like, a chief, or like a, community leader, or like a faith-based leader,
Mhm.
there's usually like some sort of construct of how power is held and sort of and disseminated in a community, and sort of recognizing that coming in, even, when we were working in Kenya, a lot of people thought that I was Kenyan. And so there was a lot of, things where I was like, okay, like I can sort of go beyond some of my, white colleagues because I'm like received and I can sort of sit in without biasing the outcomes. But as soon as I start talking, it's like everything goes downhill. So I was like, I need to make sure that I'm, I have sort of folks on the ground. We worked with the Norwegian Refugee Council and CDC in Kenya. So recognizing like, hey, we need to partner with these female translators or these female headed households to help us disseminate this, for our focus group, rather than me being the one that's like, hey, come to our focus group. Like, let's talk about my toilet, like having them sort of come organically from like a snowball kind of effect, rather than it being sort of, this American is here to talk about this, something she's made. And I think, again, recognizing that it's not, because I feel like, again, as designers, you're so proud of what you've created and you want to show people and you want to talk to people. But I think it is that humility of saying, in order for us to really fully understand the extent to which this works, at some point, like I can't be the messenger. And I think, and I think that has, its own constructs here in the US as well, recognizing a lot of those intersectionalities and recognizing that you can have the best intentions, but if you don't recognize how you're received, like that will always bias the outcomes.
Yeah. I like that as well. Like who the messenger is and what the channel is that it's being spoken through, because there are obviously like a lot of community leaders embedded in these communities already. Well, if someone is kind of newer to, equitable design processes, especially internationally, are there certain like resources or tools that you would recommend them? And also, like, how do people find you? And I just remember that it's Chicago Beyond. That I don't know if you're familiar with them.
Yep.
They put out the
awesome.
Why Am I Always Being Researched document, which is great. But are there resources that you like to follow? You mentioned the one that your thesis advisor had written, but are there others?
So we actually have like a bunch of resources. So I'm happy to sort of, I don't know if it's easier to like send it via text, but I think like I can put like a list together so that it can be sort of available for folks to check out. But I do think sort of this idea around really understanding what it means to actually move in a way that's equity centered, rather than it sort of being a kind of checkbox process, which I think, again, a lot of people have really good intentions, or a lot of organizations have really good intentions, but if it's not something that's integrated in the whole of how you move, it does sort of, negate a lot of the big pieces that are important in how kind of you conduct this work. And so I think kind of being critical to that in your own practice as you're evolving as a designer or creative or a maker in this world, as well as in the organizations that you're a part of, sort of recognizing like, how might we improve, and framing it that way too, where it's not like we're failures or we're terrible. It's sort of how might we continue to be better at this practice. There's a bunch of toolkits. I'll say one, the Designer's Critical Alphabet, I think is a good one. It's on Etsy, I think. And there's something that's similar to that, where it's like a designer's kit or toolkit for learning sort of words and what words mean as it relates to equity and inclusion, which I think, again, depending on the nature of your organization, could be really powerful to sort of break down some of these stigma, break down some of these conversations so people actually know what these words mean. Because I think, again, sometimes words can be very, very trendy, and you might not actually know what you're talking about. And
words like what are some examples of words
so I think like even words like intersectionality is something where people are like, I'm not really sure what it means, but I know I'm supposed to say it, so I'm going to say it. And I think unpacking sort of what does it actually mean to you individually and how you present, and how does that show up in your work, as well as things like decolonizing. I think that's been like a big word that's been used a lot recently. And I think recognizing that doesn't necessarily resonate with all communities or all people, and sort of what do we actually mean by that word, and how are we actually showing up in that way. There's a bunch of tools that I'm happy to sort of share the links to.
We're happy to add them to the post. And I really like the angle and just the approach of making it very personal, because it is at the end of the day, and kind of reflecting on like how you show up, what things mean to you, like how you relate to certain contexts and things like that, because at the end of the day, that's stronger than any one process or tool is going to just magically make something more equitable in the moment.
Right. Yes. And I think too, just like as people are talking about and working in these big movements towards change, I think it is again, it is really, it gets overwhelming, right? Like, especially if you're a part of an institution or establishment that is slower to uptake some of these things that might be higher priority for you. And I think sort of recognizing that, the individual agency that we all hold, and how that plays a role in moving the needle, even if it's a slow
Yeah.
journey. I think that there's a lot of power in sort of recognizing that even if you're just on your own, sort of going through these practices and improving your own ways, that that's still enough to
Right.
contribute.
Right. Yeah. I mean, you work with a lot of larger institutions. Have you seen like certain things that kind of move the needle more or less? Like I agree that demonstrating things kind of yourself, even or with your team, is always useful, because even us, like as Exygy, we've seen our clients kind of adopt different pieces of what we're doing as being larger institutions and learning
Yeah.
just through example.
Yeah. I mean, I think that there are, again, if you're sort of intentional about what you're trying to do, and kind of how you're showing up. I mean, I think, yes, there are some some folks that I've worked with that, it's hard. They're, bureaucratic institutions, and it's hard to sort of actually see the change that you're looking to see just because of how they're set up. And I think one of the things, I've tried to do is, in moments where you see that tension, that conflict, to raise the question. So I know in my practice, I'm hired a lot as, graphic designer and data visualization. And so I will, a lot of times, you might be aware of this, a lot of times stock images, particularly in health, you'll see a
Mm.
lot of Black and brown bodies as sort of recipients of the ones that are benefiting from the service of others. And I often will try really hard, which again, finding this
Mm.
narrative switch in a
Mm.
visual is hard. But I mean, I think finding that in an image and replacing them. And then if folks bring it up and they're like, hey, Jazz, like, I noticed there's a lot of like, Black scientists. Like, okay, like, let's talk about
Let's
like,
talk about it. Yeah.
what, yeah.
What made you bring it up with me? Yeah.
Yeah. So I think, again, like, that's just something I've done personally, where it's like, okay, I'm working with a bigger client, a bigger institution, but I'm going to try in my own way to sort of bring up these conversations in a way that, people are interested in it and are bringing it up. And, it's not me sort of trying to break down the wall of something that isn't ready to change. It's sort of,
Right.
having people be like, hey, I have a question about this. Like, let's talk about it.
Yeah. Like the conversations are part of that change
Right.
process.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
I love it. Well, I'd love to. Well, how do people get in touch with you, first of all? And then I'll end with like a fun question.
Yeah, yeah. So I am on LinkedIn. I'm on Instagram, Twitter. So I'm Jasmine K. Burton, across all platforms. Wish for Wash, we're wishforwash.com, periodfutures.org, and the hybridhype.com. So those are the orgs,
Yeah.
myself, and yeah, happy to connect with folks that are interested in engaging in this work. We're always looking for to have more people join our team, to support others. So yeah, we have a bunch of really cool like materials in the pipeline. So definitely happy to engage with anyone that's interested.
Yeah. Well, I'd love to end with just like, what is something people usually don't know about you?
Um, okay. Okay. I think I think a lot of folks like over the past year, but I think for me over the past several years have really come to enjoy hiking, which
Mm.
uh, for me, the piece of that is really connected to a lot of the work that I do sort of with sanitation, with hygiene, with like the environment, and being connected with the environment and finding that connection between the environment and people. And the reason that I think that a lot of, I mean, unless you know me personally, don't know that, is that, I mean, I wasn't always like the most outdoorsy person, but I think, yeah, like finding that balance between people and the planet, and like seeing it in real time and being a part of it. And then also recently, my sister and I have been more involved in sort of, democratizing access to the great outdoors, and what does it mean
Mm.
to like, be a person of color in the outdoors in the US, and feeling safe and
Mhm.
honored and respected and all these things, which I think again is like a really interesting space that I never thought I would be a part of. But yeah, I mean, I think it's so important, again, with COVID, you see there's so much interconnection with how we all exist in this world, and finding those connection points, finding those ways to continue to keep your fire for your
Mhm.
work aflame is something that has been so important to me, because I really am not trying to be one of those people that burn out from this. Like I like
Yeah.
finding those touch points so that you can stay inspired is like so important,
Yeah.
I think.
Yeah, for sure. Well, thanks so much for taking the time to chat with us. And I would love people to be able to connect with you and all the resources you shared with us today.
Yes, thank you so much. I really appreciate it.